Well, good morning, ETR Nation. It is the 4th of July weekend, and here in the U.S., that's such a great holiday. We set off fireworks, have picnics, fire up the Barbie, and have parades. But what we want to do here on the ETR today is thank the men and women that served in the armed forces and take a minute to look at the locomotives and railroads of the armed forces. Now, although it'll pain me, we will declare a winner in the amount of locomotives and the amount of trackage that this one branch does have. So who do you think it is in the number one spot? Most locomotive, most tracks? Well, it is the U.S. Army. And that's mostly because of the Fort Eustis Military Railway, Fort Eustis, Virginia. That railroad, which is maybe not the same size it used to be, still has many miles of trackage. Hey, did you know that the Army has an MOS for railroad workers? And of course, MOS stands for Military Occupational Specialty, 88U. You can be in the military and be a railroad conductor. And why didn't anybody tell you that before now? I don't know. There aren't very many, maybe 187, but it's called Railway Operations Crew Member. And that is a reserve position. They work one weekend a month and probably 2 weeks in the summer and have a chance of getting deployed. Here they are. They wear both the uniform of the United States Army and the railroad. So for you younger than me, that might be an interesting opportunity. Here's a little promotional video put out by the Army. Go watch this.
Women responsible for supervising and operating diesel-electric locomotives and related equipment are the soldiers of Military Occupational Specialty, Railway Operations Crew Member, who serve in the United States Army Reserve.
Well, that's pretty interesting, and you can find that on the Army Reserve website. Well, let's take a field trip. Well, here's a view that most people don't get. I am retired military, so I have access to bases and stuff. I'm on Fort Stewart, which is Army in Georgia. And of course, these caught my eye. These probably were built specifically for the Army, but were built on an older frame and are probably battery genset. I'm kind of goofed that up, and I don't know exactly what I'm talking about, except for these aren't your old EMDs. New design, new way of doing it. We did this to some old General Electric switching locomotives one time back in the day. We kind of did some pioneering work in battery electrics, but not working today. It's a Sunday. Just caught my eye. Thought you might like to see it. So this is kind of the storage yard for the railroad that serves the base. That's an old ramp, belonged to CSX. Some really old boxcars, probably not used, but usually the government, the military, doesn't keep stuff around like that. Here's the yard for storing ties, switches. Let's go look at the building where they keep the locomotives or repair them sometimes. So this is the engine house. Doesn't look used that much anymore. What catches my eye, look at the bump post that's outside the building, but for the tracks that are inside the building. That's kind of interesting. So if you ever wondered what a Army engine house looks like, there you go. Fort Stewart, Georgia. Well, that was fun. Let's talk about some of the older military units. Not going to talk about steam, and this is mostly World War II and then into the future. And for some reason, the government seemed to like to buy odd units. This 6-axle Baldwin, to me, is like that. And were they supporting manufacturers that really needed the orders? Possibly, but they would order all kind of weird things. Baldwins, Davenports, Whitcombs. And these are in museums. You can find them around the U.S. This is a 65-ton Whitcomb center cab. Many of these were built for the Army. And then through the 70s and 80s, you would find them at plants. This is in Ohio in 1970 at a quarry. This is a center cab Whitcomb that I found along the Ohio River in West Virginia. It's at an old mill, and I drove by it and thought, oh, I know exactly what that is. To me, not a very desirable unit. Might have had a Buda diesel engine, and Westinghouse electrics. General Electric locomotives had GE traction motors, generators. Most everybody else had Westinghouse, which I think were inferior. You may argue that. Feel free. I like General Electric. Well, this is a Baldwin, I think a VO1000 served in Bremerton. Another example of non-GE or EMD. Baldwin diesel zones, where you can go see a bunch of Baldwins. Well, this, I believe, is a RS4TC. This exact locomotive, Graham and I were paid to go to Texas to inspect this locomotive and make a recommendation. I didn't like it because it had Westinghouse. The diesel engine wouldn't start, but the wheels were amazing, and it was in very, very good condition overall. Many of these have been pushed out of the military and then to museums and industry. This is fairly common. There were many of these built, 74 of them for the Army alone. Do you know where one is? How about at the Mid-Continent Railway Museum? And that's probably one that you could go see and possibly even ride on. If you're a volunteer, you might even get to take a wrench to it every now and then. Well, number 2 position, the United States Navy, anchors away. And that's because they had naval shipyards where they brought in a lot of material. Brooklyn, Navy Shipyard, Philadelphia, Bremerton, San Diego. Hats off to the United States Navy and all the locomotives that they had. Well, yes, the Navy does have a couple gen sets as well. These are in a great catch. Those are the same units built for the Army that we looked at earlier. This unit is by Brookville out of Pennsylvania. I believe this is serving in Bremerton at the Navy shipyard there. Nice small industrial locomotive. This 45-ton GE looks a lot like the one that I bought from the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. We trucked it to Ohio, reconditioned it, leased it to the Landmark Terminal in South Charleston. Then it was sold and moved to Zanesville, Ohio, where it is on a tourist line south of Zanesville. 45-ton GE side rod, probably about a 1944. Well, let's go on to the United States Marine Corps. Thank you, gentlemen and ladies, for your service. This is a 44-ton GE. You might think it looks like a 65 or an 80, but look how the handrail stopped at the nose. That's the sure sign of a 44-ton. The United States Air Force. Look at this. This is a beautiful example of the 80-ton. I bought one like this from Tinker Air Force Base, leased it to the Santa Fe BNSF in Phoenix, Arizona, Sun City. Then sold it to International Mineral and Chemical in Minnesota, took in a 44-ton on trade, scrapped the 44-ton, donated the trucks to a museum to put under a trolley car. That's in Newark, Ohio. If you ever see their trolley, look at the trucks. They're from a 44-ton GE. Well, the 80-tonner did serve every branch. Here's a nice Army version. Notice this has got friction bearing, plain bearing. This Navy one has got roller bearing. Remember about a year ago, here's roller bearing. We did a special on what killed a lot of industrial locomotives, and it was the fact that they had plain bearings and were just terrible to move. These two old units here, the front one is an old 80-tonner. The back one is a 65-ton. They're both roller bearing. So a lot of these were modified. The military put money into them. Again, the Air Force one with the friction bearing. Friction bearing. And you can tell because it still has the lids on it. When you see the round end and the 3 bolts like a freight car axle, that's a roller bearing. And that would modernize them, less friction. This Navy unit's got roller bearing. Well, let's go on to the United States Coast Guard. Definitely the best branch of all. And an interesting shot of a locomotive. And you know, it says Coast Guard on it, but I believe this is probably a Central Vermont unit that they painted to recognize the Coast Guard in the northeast part of the United States. Nice shot by William Warfield. United States Coast Guard, best branch of all. Well, let's take a little minute and feature the NASA Railroad. And it really can be done best by going to watch this video, Final Run of the NASA Railroad, on YouTube. So yes, NASA also had locomotives. Go see it here. And of course, NASA is not one of the armed branches, but I thought you'd find that interesting. That was part of the shuttle program, and when the shuttle program ended, they did not need rail service at Port Canaveral. That video explains it all. Well, thank you to all of you that served, both in the armed forces and in the railroads. And happy 4th of July weekend. Thank you, ETR Nation. Have a safe weekend.